As weird as the 1960s became, Crazy Tom stood out. He set fires and started fights on the Stanford campus, supplied guns and explosives to fellow militants, and staged holdups, quote, to support the revolution. He also created a secret mountaintop training camp and bomb factory to groom would-be urban guerrillas, from young, mostly white Maoists, to the secret Black Panther army trying to free Soledad brother George Jackson from San Quentin. Then, in February and March 1971, Crazy Tom Mosher put on a suit and tie, brushed down his wispy blonde hair, and testified in secret before the Senate Subcommittee on Internal Security. According to his sworn testimony, the revolutionary terrorist had worked all along for the Federal Bureau of Investigation and its state counterpart, the California Bureau of Criminal Investigation and Identification, the CII. In his testimony, Mosher warned of a growing campaign of revolutionary sabotage, terror, and guerrilla war, which had already left a trail of violence and murder across Northern California. The Senate published his tale at taxpayers' expense, while Reader's Digest ran a first-hand account of his experiences inside the revolutionary left. As Mosher and the senators told it, he had been an informant, passively watching the illegal violence of the left and reporting to the authorities to help them enforce the law. As those of us who knew him had seen for ourselves, he had created much of the terrorist violence he now condemned. At the time, I was an anti-war activist at Stanford, increasingly burned out, cynical, and without too many lingering liberal illusions. Yet I never would have suggested that the FBI or other police agency had paid Crazy Tom to shoot guns on campus, set fires, or run a guerrilla training camp. More likely, I figured, he had created his own chaos while selling his handlers whatever bullshit he could get them to buy. I was wrong. On March 8, 1971, just as Mosher was about to testify, a group calling itself the Citizens Commission to Investigate the FBI broke into the Bureau's office in Medea, Pennsylvania, and liberated over 1,000 classified documents, which they began releasing to the press. The purloined files included the hitherto secret caption COINTELPRO, shorthand for Counterintelligence Program. NBC's Carl Stern then filed suit under FOIA, and in 1973, a federal court ordered the FBI to make public its clandestine COINTELPRO memos. One of the memos caught my eye. In May 1968, Director J. Edgar Hoover had secretly authorized the FBI, quote, to expose, disrupt, discredit, or otherwise neutralize the New Left's opposition to the Vietnam War and support for black liberation. Expose, disrupt, discredit, or otherwise neutralize are terms of art, and none of Hoover's underlings could have doubted what he was telling them to do. Far from enforcing the law or protecting our First Amendment rights to protest, the FBI would use against us the classic techniques that the Tsarist secret police and its European counterparts had used for centuries, that the FBI had perfected since the post-World War I Palmer raids, and that the CIA and military had for years directed against foreign foes. Our Crazy Tom, it appeared, was looking like far more than a self-propelled provocateur. To find out for certain, a group of us at the Pacific Studies Center, a radical off-campus research institute, decided to look into what Mosher had done with us and to us. We interviewed Tom over a period of several days, during which he ranged from overly talkative to irritatingly cagey to truly terrified that we had set him up to be killed. We talked with dozens of his closest former comrades, and we tried to decipher the relevant COINTELPRO memos with all their deleted names and details. The court had allowed the FBI to black out every place where Mosher's name might have fit, but once we reconstructed his violent life and crimes, no one could doubt that Crazy Tom did exactly what the counterintelligence programs called for him to do. So we'll get into a little background of him here. This section's called Too Crazy to Be a Pig. Whatever else he might have been, the short, scrappy Mosher was no spoiled preppy. His father, he told me, had been sent to the penitentiary, leaving his mother to turn tricks at home, while he grew up on the streets of Uptown Chicago, learning to survive among the roughest rednecks, hillbillies, and other refugees from the American hinterland. Smart, sensitive, and charismatic, he quickly learned how to hustle, charming the improbable W. Clement Stone, an insurance tycoon who gave millions to former President Nixon. Stone also wrote books telling people how to develop PMA, a positive mental attitude, by jumping up and down every morning chanting, "I am healthy, I am happy, I am successful." Tom met Stone at the McCormick Boys Club, took him as a big brother, and later got him to write a recommendation to Stanford, where the eager young man enrolled in the fall of 1962. We'll come back to that in a second. W. Clement Stone, PMA, anyways. Very interesting. So he also kind of a gifted child, it sounds like. Right?
Yeah.
plucked off the streets of Uptown Chicago. So Mosher tried hard to score in the world of big money and soft manners. But for all his positive mental attitude, the foster son of success lacked the financial backing and social background, while he caused so many fights that the fraternity he joined asked him to leave. Quote, Mosher was one of the most violent people I'd ever known, recalled one of his well-bred frat brothers. In the space of 2.5 months, he punched out 8 people. Tom finally dropped out of Stanford in the spring of 1965, filled with admiration, awe, envy, hatred, and resentment for the Silver Spoon set. Had he failed, or had Stanford failed him? The wiry street fighter tried to work out the balance, but never could. After spending a few months at the civil rights movement in Mississippi, Mosher returned to Uptown Chicago, where he became, quote, a revolutionary. Several of my friends from Students for a Democratic Society, SDS, had started a local community organizing project called Jobs or Income Now, JOIN, and Mosher, whom I met casually at the time, became one of its stars. He also married a college professor's daughter named Mary, fathered a son, Keith, and rubbed elbows with many of America's best-known young radicals. In August 1968, the SDS leader and later weatherwoman Bernadine Dorn asked him to go in her place on a trip to Cuba. As fellow travelers remembered him, Mosher was a gung-ho Che Guevara bent on guerrilla war. In fact, he was already working for the government, or at least looking for a job. Quote, I really wasn't such a stone-cold revolutionary in Cuba, he told me. I was just acting as one, carefully observing and analyzing for my own benefit. You'd have done the same thing if you had in mind what I had in mind. Yikes. Returning from Cuba in October, Tom met with FBI agents and gave them films he had taken on the trip. He then moved back to Stanford, and no later than, let us say, April 1969, he began what he called his, quote, active association with the Bureau. Why did Tom sign on with the feds? Take your pick. In various breaths, he spoke of his poor boy's resentment of rich white radicals and black militant thugs, his patriotic disgust with their violence and anti-Americanism, his long-standing anti-communism, and his sudden disillusionment with Cuban socialism. He also mentioned pressure from the law, his need for money, and growing marital strains with Mary. In Tom's topsy-turvy mind, most, if not all, could have played a part. One other possibility, and this is interesting, was that Mosher came to the FBI from military intelligence. Yeah. His military records, which we managed to see, showed that he had served 2.5 months on active duty with the Marines. He then remained in the reserves for 6 years, but without any evidence of ever attending a single reserve meeting. This was the file one would expect from someone performing an undercover assignment, but we were never able to nail that down. In any case, Tom's temper, his passion for guns and explosives, and what he called his, quote, peculiar mental illness at the time made him the perfect provocateur. His madness drove him to live on the edge, continuously courting danger, while working for the FBI allowed him to carve out a free fire zone between the militants and the law where he could let rip his terrifying rage. Just as the COINTELPRO memos directed, Mosher brought into the anti-war movement an incredible aura of violence, which disrupted our protests from within and discredited them to those on the fringe. He baited the moderates and egged on the militants. He even fought right-wing young Americans for freedom, threatening publicly to sodomize one of their campus leaders. His fury surging just below the skin, he acted like a savage 6-year-old, flying into a rage whenever he wanted, upsetting, unnerving, and grasping for control. Flashing his pistol at a nonviolent anti-war sit-in April 1969, he offered to take care of the campus police and boasted of trashing their car windows. Time to get serious, he urged.
I love
Time to pick up the gun.
Yeah. Great.
Late one night, he fired 8 or 9 shots into the home of Stanford President Kenneth Pitzer and then tried to get the incident reported in the press. He also fired into a university auditorium, and during a demonstration against ROTC, he fired several shots into the air. And then there's like a drawing of him from 1972, which is like super fucking hilarious. That we'll probably post. His caricature. In July 1969, Mosher went to a party at the home of H. Bruce Franklin, a brilliant scholar of both Herman Melville and science fiction, and a prime target of the FBI's COINTELPRO program. The, quote, Maoist English professor, as the press called him, had become a convert to old left thinking, zealously defending the historic necessity of Stalinist terror in the Soviet Union, a fatuous claim that won him scant support. Together with his equally militant wife Jane, Bruce ran the Revolutionary Union, which preached the impossibility of nonviolent revolution, but overlooked the even larger improbability of a violent one. The party that night was celebrating the acquittal of several radicals charged with fomenting a street riot in downtown Palo Alto. A large crowd showed up, including the defendants, 3 jurors, most of the local anti-establishment, and some visiting left-wing honchos from across the country. The guests were talking, dancing, and drinking wine when Mosher slapped a juror who was dancing with Mary. Bruce jumped in, some serious brawling began, and it looked for a time that the police might come, using the opportunity to raid the house, search for weapons, and rough up a few self-proclaimed revolutionaries. After the punch-up, Franklin cooled to Mosher, telling his comrades not to trust the lunatic. "I may be crazy," Mosher replied, "but I'm not a pig." Okay.
Wow.
Okay. In spite of Franklin's tenure, the Stanford administration soon brought disciplinary charges against him, holding him responsible for the climate of senseless violence that Crazy Tom helped create. Adding to the furor, Mosher leaked hearsay stories to the press, accusing Franklin of supplying weapons and explosives to the Black Panther Party in Oakland. Such stories took their toll. Sacrificing civil liberties in hopes of gaining security, the faculty judges voted to fire Franklin for his political activism. Like Bruce, the vast majority of us in the Stanford movement tried to keep a safe distance from Crazy Tom, finding his behavior bizarre. Many of us heard stories of how he pulled his gun on friends, beat his wife, and bragged of, quote, rolling queers outside the gay bars in Palo Alto's Whiskey Gulch. We saw him as a constant chameleon, always shifting roles. One day he would play the bearded gorilla in field jacket and combat boots. Another day he would pose as the clean-shaven movement lawyer William Z. Foster, turned out in suit, tie, and wingtips. He would also appear as a campus queen in purple velvet, a white Huey P. Newton in a costly leather coat, an Aryan racist, an authentic-sounding anti-Semite spouting slogans from the neo-Nazi Bible Imperium.
Yeah,
right? Or an off-the-screen James Dean in Levi's and T-shirt, a sleeve rolled up around a pack of cigarettes. Quote, "I'm from Uptown, man. The toughest neighborhood in America."
Right, yeah.
Cool. Tom was crazy, all right, and everybody knew it. Why then did anyone ever trust him? In part, he traded on his poor white origins, especially with all the guilt-ridden rich kids who looked to the working class to make the revolution. Quote, "In Uptown, we're really more lumpen proletariat," he later told me with a knowing smile. "None of us can keep a job." But mostly he and his rags to revolution image found an appreciative audience in a small but growing cadre with red books and revolvers who were always trying to act more Mao than thou, a maddening vanguard that one wit dubbed the, quote, "marksman lemmingists." He would periodically make chiding remarks about my nonviolence or put forward adventurous proposals, one pacifist recalled. But he was only one of many political crazies. There were lots of people who had even weirder ideas than he did. So, Tom's craziness became Tom's cover, as he stamped the anti-war movement with his own brand of random terror. Perhaps we were also beguiled by a lingering faith in the very system we opposed. Mosher's too crazy to be an informer, we all agreed. The government would never hire anyone as loony as him. But that was just the point. Tom's violence and peculiar mental illness at the time were precisely what his FBI handlers wanted. How better to disrupt, misdirect, and discredit our opposition to the war? Mosher was a loaded gun that the Bureau pointed at us, trashing our First Amendment right to protest without government interference and our freedom to decide for ourselves the message we wanted our nonviolent demonstrations to convey. Oof. So, a lot,
Yeah.
A lot of relevant shit there. The marksman lemmingists, more Mao than thou.
Yeah, that's that particular part I was going to mention earlier. That's very resonant with our Ghazi Kodo discussion from earlier. The fact that he would play up or be kind of coy about having gone to college and act like he was the salt of the earth. Because there is in these sort of left organizations, often they require a certain level of fluency with theoretical texts or whatever, or kind of concerns that develop in a liberal arts or kind of a bourgeois environment, really. I think there definitely is a contingent on the modern left and then the left in the 60s that kind of has a certain class anxiety, or a shame or guilt driven. And you can see that being exploited, in both of these cases where, you have, the reparations core of Black Hammer organization where, to make up for,
all these, guilt simping whites,
yeah,
like
you just
who are like
buy Ghazi's like quote unquote caffeine pills, like off market stimulants or whatever. Like, and
well, it's so much stuff, right? I mean, I think even like Charles Manson was able to parlay
Jim
that
Jones
a little
too,
bit.
you know,
Yeah, Jim Jones.
Jim
But yeah, like
What
the
did I
fact
say?
that the fact that like Manson was like this kind of lumpen proletariat, like there's a certain romanticism around like the lumpen proletariat, I think both like black and white in the 60s. And I think some people looked at like the Black Panthers as kind of probably more for like the kind of language they used and like their posture more than like their actual ideas or ideology. Because I mean, like Bobby Seale and Huey Newton met, I think, at Scripps College. So like they were like, even they were like in college. Like they weren't like gang members or something that like read Mao one day or something like that. Even though they did, you know, kind of recruit people off the streets and things like that. But then also like the white lumpen proletariat, like the poor whites, which you still see a little bit today whenever anyone kind of brings up like the white working class.
Right. Yeah, it's a thing.
Which
it's
obviously
definitely a thing.
it is a real
But it's also
thing.
like there's a specter of like what the white working class is, you know, like usually if someone has like some kind of hang up about, you know, whatever, like wokeness or whatever, they'll like invoke like, you know, an imaginary like Republican worker who, you know, is usually just like in their own imagination. Not to say that there aren't people like that, but you know, it's definitely just like a trope in these kind of like stupid inner left debates.
And then on the other side, the kind of sympathy for the white worker crowd, like particularly in the Trump era, became almost like this, like it's funny how you see it trickle down into Hollywood. I was saying to one of our mutual friends the other day, like, oh look, another like white working class misery like prestige movie is coming out that's going to try to win Oscars, and it's always in some like Rust Belt town, like some Bruce Springsteen ass like beaten down kind of thing, and it just smacks of like coastal liberal elites like parachuting in and being like, wow, like they are people, you know, and but like this real heavy romanticization of the misery and like, I guess you could say dirtbagginess of like poor whites, whether they're like Southern or they're like white ethnics in like Rust Belt cities, and it can get, I think, kind of carried away. I mean,
I still feel like in the like imagination, like people don't really often think of like black people as being workers, or even gay people or something like that as being like workers. Like a lot of the time when they imagine a worker, they think of like a cartoon of a construction worker or something, you know, like a white guy who's got like a pot belly and he's wearing like a hard hat, you know, like, and he, you know, that's like what they, because their own experience like is not, you know, in sort of I don't know, manual trades. And I mean, this kind of like, you know, bleeds a little bit into the whole like discourse of like redefining what class even is, where it has nothing to do with like wealth or like, you know, economics position, but like sort of meaningless signifiers. You know, like I saw a tweet the other day that was like Elon Musk is working class and like our local school board is ruling class.
Is elite. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Like it's, you see this type of thing all the time. Like I remember that Slate Star Codex blog had like one of the best examples where he said like, you know, we're redefining working class. Republicans, like, feel free to take this. You know, Trump is like working class because he likes NASCAR and he doesn't like musical theater or whatever. You know, shit
exactly.
Like that,
it is kind of it is full of like these like cultural signifiers. It's like I can think of like a friend of mine from high school who went on to be like an electrician and has by far like made so much more money than I have.
Yeah,
like,
totally.
But
yeah,
like he didn't go to college and stuff like that.
Like
so
grad students are the ruling class. Like,
so if you saw this guy, you would immediately think like he drives like a lifted truck, like he wears like, you know, board shorts and like he dresses the way of like white working class person.
You know?
Oh, for sure. No, they're not exactly. But you know what I mean? It's like if you looked at that person or you talked with them, you would like get this vibe of like, oh, he's like super white working class, but he's actually like middle class, like, and actually probably makes more money than most people who go to humanities grad
plumbers
school.
and electricians, generally are pretty, definitely more than people who go to grad school. Are piddling stipends.
But he wouldn't see himself
people,
as more elite than associate, an adjunct professor that makes $35,000 a year, but has 2 grad degrees and considers himself part of the intelligentsia. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I don't even think that grad students. I don't think that professors think of themselves. I mean, professors, if anything, no one wants to think of themselves as being in America. No one really wants to think of themselves. We talked about this before. No one wants to think of themselves as part of an elite class. It's something that you have to painfully acknowledge and kind of do self-crit about. Even in any context. Well,
I think there's people in America that are unashamed at making money. That's a very
maybe privately, but not publicly.
Well, there's always a kind of thing about everyone wants to kind of pretend to be middle class in America.
Exactly. H.W. Bush, probably privately doesn't care about being a Bush, or being very elite. But, in terms of how, or W, how they present themselves, it's different. There is a sort of general shame that attends it, in any context, especially in left-wing contexts. But in general, one of the most powerful myths in America is the myth of the self-made man. That's the
true.
real icon.
Even the Silicon Valley lords, they have the self-made person, which is bullshit, obviously. They're not self-made, but also that they're kind of underdogs, in the they're iconoclasts and Elon Musk is disrupting things. So he's not an elite, he's somehow
creating value. He made all that money, so he deserves
it. Just so happens that he's so good at creating value that he has billions of dollars, and you can't really hold that against him. But there is still a kind of feeling of maybe you would hold that against him if it was framed differently, but it never is framed in a critical way.
No, exactly. And in fact, it's worse to be someone who is for instance, knowledge maybe isn't seen as being value. So a teacher is not creating value in the way that Elon Musk is by pretending that he's digging a hole for a car to go into to decongest the highways or whatever. Sure. It's all a lie and bullshit. But anyway, they're.
I think that this desire to prostrate yourself or defer to, while I think it often comes from a good place, I think particularly when you're talking about white radicals interfacing with black radicals, I think there's definitely a huge positive. And I think generally speaking, the white radical sympathy for the Black Panther Party I see as overall a positive thing.
For sure.
But I think it also, you do have to remain we always have to remain a little vigilant, because you could get a guy like Crazy Tom coming in who leans in to being this white working class dirtbag lumpen proletariat from Uptown Chicago and stuff like that, and then he starts talking about blowing up laboratories and stuff, and you all kind of want to go along with him because he embodies this kind of working class masculinity that maybe people feel self-conscious that they're just armchair revolutionaries, and they're not it's easy to guilt trip, I think, people, especially in this period, into feeling what are you really doing? You're just sitting around having meetings, but we need to go out and do stuff, and even manipulating, taking the actions of people like the Black Panthers, which I think honestly a lot of their provocations were well thought out and calculated. They weren't, things spiraled out of control as the violence escalated, but initially I think they had strict rules, for example, early on about kind of rules of engagement with the police. You'd stock them with guns, but you wouldn't just start shooting at them for no reason, because you'd bring down a huge reaction. But so anyway, that kind of leads into the next part of this article. Where Crazy Tom takes it up a notch. This is titled "Training for Guerrilla War." Reaching beyond the Stanford campus, Mosher quickly found his ticket to the big time in a remote patch of ravines, redwoods, and rattlesnakes high in the nearby Santa Cruz Mountains. The land, as it was called, belonged to a group of draft resistors who had bought it for a retreat. It was also the outdoor playpen of one of Tom's former fraternity brothers, a nearsighted and slightly mad charmer called Blind Timmy. Tom had heard that his old friend still lived in the area and set off to find him, driving into the mountains on an old logging road, then trekking upward along a tiny twisting trail until he came to a small clearing with a homemade cabin built of wood and stone. In the clearing, Mosher spotted Timmy frolicking with a band of teenage boys and girls. They were all naked. A self-anointed guru, blind Timmy preached the virtues of pansexualism, seeking universal unity and spiritual ecstasy through an open-ended communion of bodies and souls. In time, Tom and Mary joined in, and for a while it was Timmy, Tom, and Mary. But the menage did not work out. Quote, I found that I was emotionally right-wing and came to see the whole thing as diabolical possession, Tom confessed. I guess my soul just had too much of the funky gray Midwest. Ain't nothing new under the sun.
Interesting, yeah.
New Age cult tries to be poly. It's a disaster.
Yeah.
So Timmy scooted off to do his missionary work elsewhere, leaving Tom free to use the land as he wanted, which is just as the FBI memo suggested, quote, to take advantage of all opportunities for counterintelligence and also inspire activity in instances where circumstances warrant. As early as the spring of 1969, Mosher brought some Stanford radicals and black militants from Oakland to the mountain hideaway to practice shooting and, quote, discuss alone the techniques of using high explosives, as he later testified to the Senate subcommittee. He and his black comrades also got hold of over 100 sticks of dynamite, along with timers, mercuric fulminate for the fuses, and electronic detonators, all of which they stashed on the mountain. By summer, the land had become, as Tom told it, quote, literally a bomb factory. Every bomb factory needs a mad scientist, and Mosher found it in a short, bright, and profoundly angry black student named Jimmy Johnson. Mosher had met him at Stanford in 1963, and the two outsiders grew close. JJ had dropped out about the same time as Tom and was just coming back to finish his degree in chemical engineering. Mosher spotted him at an SDS party where, as friends in the Black Student Union put it, JJ stood out, quote, like a fly in the buttermilk. The two began spending time together and winding each other up. Together, they jeered at the tough-talking rads in their Tea Party sit-ins and promised to show these punk kids what revolution was all about. JJ's friends in SDS tried to warn him away, telling him that Mosher was crazy, if not a police agent, but most of the Stanford radicals thought Johnson a little loosely wired too, and left him to his fate. Mad Dog Jimmy, Crazy Tom, they seemed a perfect pair. At the time, JJ was facing trial for rioting in downtown Palo Alto, while the university was trying to discipline him for disrupting a trustees meeting where he had protested Stanford's millions of dollars in Pentagon research contracts. So much for civil disobedience, he told Tom. Why put yourself up in plain view for something that doesn't get any results anyway? Why not use something safer and more efficient? Something with a bang. When Mosher heard this, his eyes lit up. Many young radicals talked about bombs, but JJ knew how to make them. Fire bombs, dynamite bombs, time bombs. Quote, JJ used to blow my mind with some of the things he made, Mosher recalled. He even made a timing device from a photoelectric cell, which would go off when someone opened the door or turned on a light. Introducing JJ to some of the most militant blacks in Northern California, Mosher pushed him to act out his anger. What Mosher did was to bring this machismo, tough guy shit into the movement, JJ later explained. But at the time, he seemed to JJ to be one of the few white boys willing to do more than talk. With JJ as his revolutionary bomb maker, Mosher spread the word among Northern California radicals that he had a full-fledged training camp in the mountains. He then recruited the most militant to crawl on their bellies over the rocky terrain, snipe at make-believe pigs behind every bush, blow up tree stumps with homemade bombs, and stage mock guerrilla raids on whatever targets their rich imaginations would conjure up. Where blind Timmy and his nubile playmates once pursued their polymorphous pleasures, stern-eyed guerrillas now trained for war, while the FBI's Tom Mosher, king of the mountain and master of, quote, Guevara Ranch, supplied them with dynamite, grenades, pistols, rifles, and machine guns. Of course, the modest Mosher denied any credit. My role was strictly passive, he told me. I simply used my access to the land to monitor the illegal activity of others, a standard law enforcement technique. Playing the super patriot, he denied that the FBI ever ordered him to go against the law or that they ever ran the COINTELPROs, except perhaps on paper. Those stupid sons of bitches never understood that we were at war, he insisted. I had to go beating on doors to push them to do something about indiscriminate terror. Wow, he's like a Stallone, like Cobra Cop, basically, yeah. Like beneath that. So, like a standard law enforcement technique.
Yeah, it's really funny the way he talks. Like in his Senate testimony, which I think we'll talk about more thoroughly later. He's like, I assess the situation to be, you know, like very like cop speak.
I will say that having read all of his Senate testimony from 1971, that it surprised me, given that his reputation is of such like a mad, crazy, bad, like motherfucker, like just out of control, that when he sits down in front of the Senate, he's like very well spoken, very knowledgeable, and I would say even kind of like thoughtful about like kind of describing like, you know, his like taxonomizing of the new left and the various currents and shit like that. Like he even corrects the senators a few times when they want him to say, like they're trying to lead him into saying like, so they were brainwashed in Cuba, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, no, that's not how it works. And, you know, he's like even complimentary to the new left when he says like we were doing certain strategies that were like very popular, very effective, and then other strategies which were like not effective and like what's kind of, you have to read between the lines to see where he's omitting his own involvement in some of the less good things that happen or some of the crazier things that happen. But he strikes you as like somebody who, like, I don't know what this peculiar mental illness that he had at the time was that they keep quoting that he said, but maybe is it the personality A, personality B? Like, was he hypnotized by Estabrooks?
Yeah,
kind of thing.
But no,
because
I definitely noticed the same thing that he. He seems like very like well spoken, like very focused, like highly intelligent. I guess that is consistent with how some people described him, but. Yeah, he doesn't seem like. We've read on the show like Senate testimonies from people who seem like much more like crazy, to use his nickname. You know.
Yeah, so I think I think it would sort of debunk what some people like might want to. I don't know, minimize like the Tom Mosher story by being like he was just a crazy person that the FBI kind of was able to like loosely control, and he kind of set him off to like do his own thing, and it was all his own peculiar mental condition, because like this guy comes off as sounding like he was in much more conscious control of like what he was doing, both when he was like pretending to be a radical and in terms of like his coordination with the FBI and the other like police authorities. Like he seemed like he had a very clear, cogent idea of what he was doing, and even kind of like called out the FBI for like not being as aggressive as he wanted to be and stuff like that, and sees himself as kind of a cop. And I think we can't forget the military intelligence connection, because that really didn't come up very much in the testimony or in this article. I guess he said that they weren't really able to verify it, but I think he entered the Marines the same year he entered Stanford, and I think he was in from 62 to 67. And the fact that is peculiar that he was on active duty for like 3 months and then on reserve for the rest of the time and like never went to a reserve meeting, but he was also going to college at the time, you know?
Yeah.
And it does overlap with like,
I guess say, that's like consistent with someone who would be undercover, but they can't substantiate it fully, or they weren't able to. Someone who like just didn't go to any meetings and
there's still fragments of the story that maybe we haven't even like dug up, and more on the side of not just COINTELPRO, but like Operation Chaos, which involved the CIA and the militaries. Like that, like once you got to like 1969, that's when you really saw military intelligence undercovers infiltrating the anti-war movement domestically. And so, there could have been that as well.
For access to the full-length episode, subscribe to the Hour of Frequency at patreon.com/subliminaljihad.